Okay, the Dirty Kitten Gravel Race in Rapidan, Virginia. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Wanted to give a quick rundown of this race, which turned out to be pretty disappointing actually. It was my first DNF. I've never not finished before. But I got to a point in this race where if I kept on going, then I had a real feeling that I was going to get taken out by an ambulance. Was registered for the 80-mile race, the full Purrito, I think they call it. And it's just shy of 80 miles. You'll end up doing just under that if you enter this distance. It's a nice neutral rolling start at the beginning, so everybody kind of rolls out together. Nobody going too quickly, which is nice. As kind of a warning for later, I think the temperature was probably in the 80s right now. We got a little early start. They backed us up a little bit, and so we started about 7:45 a.m. The course is great. It's nothing too steep, nothing too fast, nothing too sloppy, but some really good gravel throughout. There are a couple punchy climbs that are a little bit infamous, but for the most part, it's just a nice rolling course, and it's entirely isolated on either a farm or a nice public road. But that road is also gravel, and I think I saw one car the entire day. This video will be comprised of my first lap. Unfortunately, it's only 3 laps. It should have been 4. But on this first lap, they recommended taking it easy. I didn't come out in time to do a race recon, and so some of these descents you just really wanted to be careful of. Most of the gravel on this course is really loose. Other than this race, it's pretty much just a working farm, and so this is not a heavily packed place. And so it definitely made sense on the first lap, especially just to kind of ease into things, don't get too sloppy on these turns, and actually just stay upright. Shortly after this start, you'll actually start your first climb. This isn't anything massive. I want to say it was maybe a few hundred feet and pretty steady. No crazy inclines or gradients. And so it was just kind of time to pace it. Now, of course, if you're starting and you really want to win, if you want to get on the podium, then this is going to matter. This group, we got fairly bunched up, and I could actually hear quite a few people behind me who were ready to get around and pass. But especially if you're doing the full Purrito, there's a lot of people out there who are not looking to go 1,000 miles an hour in the beginning. So I'd say if you want to be considered at the pointy end of the spear, then you should probably try to get into a nice solid group toward the front before you get to this climb. This was a fun descent that actually got more fun as the day went on, and you could trust the gravel just a little bit more. You can see that both lines are pretty clear on the left side and the right side of the road. And the gravel gets a little squirrely. I was running, I think, 42-inch tires, and they were just fine. You don't need anything huge. I think if you go bigger, you'll be a little bit more comfortable. So it's really going to depend on your bike handling skills. I'd say you definitely don't want slicks or anything like that. It's going to pay to have some grip all throughout. Bunny hop through this gate, and then you'll be riding in the trees for just a few miles. I can imagine if it rained quite a bit just before that this would be pretty swampy and nasty, but we hadn't gotten a tremendous amount of rain. Heat was the order of the day, and so it was actually pretty dry and stayed pretty nice all throughout. I really wanted to stick with some other riders on this race. Gravel can be pretty lonely if you get dropped and you're ahead of the group behind you and you're behind the group ahead of you. And so my goal was really try to stay on some wheels, but it was going to just be too hard. You'll see as this video goes along that as I try to stick with groups, it just can't be maintained. I had a pretty decent nutrition plan and pacing plan. I was watching my heart rate, which is a little high the first lap, but you know, that's kind of how it is in the beginning of a little bit of a war of attrition. As you start and just trying to hold some wheels and moving through. But the temperature just kept climbing, and even though I was staying hydrated, I had 2 bottles of Scratch on the bike. I think by the end of the day, I'd probably had 6 bottles. I was supplementing with Hyperhydrate from Scratch. If you haven't tried it, it works like magic. But in the end, it was just too hot. Just my sweat rate, I just couldn't maintain a high enough pace to really stay with anybody. And by the end, you know, I was lucky to be putting out 30 watts probably. But for the time being, it was nice to actually stay on a wheel and stay with a group and be cruising along. And fortunately, the conditions are nice enough that you didn't have to watch for huge holes or anything like that. It was relatively easy to just stay on a wheel because of the course. Now, of course, did I have the power in my legs on this day? I did not have enough electrolytes, just couldn't make it happen. Eventually you come out of the woods and you'll actually be on the small road again with some two-way traffic. There's a little bit of an out and back here, so you'll stay right and everybody else stays left, which for the most part worked pretty well. You'll see later in the video that once the 60 milers come through, things get a little bit spicy and a little bit squirrely, but for the most part, it's no problem at all. This was the part I probably hated second most. The course is great and this isn't anything especially challenging, but this grass through here was like riding through beach sand. And so it was really time to just really put the legs into it and work hard if you were going to kind of keep any momentum going through here. It's a very short little stretch, but you really have to kind of work to not get bogged down here. And I didn't even have huge tires or especially grippy ones. Just a second, we'll be seeing the only wreck casualty of the day. I was just riding along with one other person. This wasn't an especially dangerous stretch or crazy stretch. I think eventually this rider's front wheel just got out from under him. Came up and he looked really shaken up, and I felt really bad that he was actually lying there alone. And so I stopped with the other rider, and he and I checked on him and made sure that he was okay, told him not to stand up too much. And fortunately there's an aid station just about, probably a fifth of a mile right up the road here. And so we rode up and made sure that he had help coming. I was also able to see him after the race, and he was pretty shaken up, but it looked like he was able to kind of ride out on his own power, which was really good. And here you can see that you'll actually be coming out onto the road. This was just after kind of an improvised aid station that they put into the race just because it was so hot. I think this was kind of a last minute decision because it was going to be in the upper 90s today, the day of the race, and so they wanted to make sure that there was a little bit of extra aid. I didn't use it the first lap. I definitely needed it quite badly on the third lap. It's nice cruising along until you get to right here, and this was sort of the bane of the race for me, was just the amount of time in direct sun just riding along. I think you'll see later the Kitten Crusher climb that everybody talks about. But these stretches right through here where you're just riding and it just felt like an oven. And then every lap, every hour, every minute just got a little bit hotter and harder, and eventually this was where it just felt like riding in an oven, and even when the wind was moving it just felt like a convection oven. Here's another example of what I was talking about, where there's just no shade to be seen. And so you'll make good time, you're cruising along, it's not especially hilly. You can actually see in the distance that little peak up there is going to be the top of the Kitten Crusher, which is a formidable climb. But this stretch on the way out and the way back, where you're just riding in direct sun, just really takes it out of me. And here it is, the legendary Kitten Crusher climb. It's not insane. There's a pretty steep gradient at the top. I rode this one. This was the only time I did. By the third lap, it was hard just to push it, the bike up to the top. I'll leave this entire section intact because I have a feeling that if you were looking for the Dirty Kitten race, you'll want to see this climb in particular. I saw some people ride to the top. I saw lots of people push their bikes. It doesn't really make a particular difference. It depends on if you think that you're going to be on the podium or not. If you're not going to be on the podium, just push your bike. You won't really go much faster. You'll see here shortly as I'm riding up to the top. I really don't get there any quicker than anybody else did, and there's an aid station at the top. So I think this is a smart one just to pace it. If you can ride it, well done. If you can't, then there's no shame. Keep your heart rate down, get to the aid station, and the volunteers at the top of this climb were fantastic. They were super enthusiastic. They were great about giving out ice and giving out everything that you could need in order to cool down, and it was really nice to get to the top. So I really want to thank the volunteers for this section. at the aid station, it's time for your descent. The descent's no joke. For me, it was kind of just all brakes. Maybe there's some mountain bikers out there. Jeremiah Bishop probably flew down this at 60 miles an hour. I did not, because my goal was actually just staying upright. I'm about 8 weeks out or so from a broken collarbone. And so the last thing I wanted was to test that titanium plate in my left collarbone by crashing. And I managed to not do that at all, in large part because I managed on these descents like this to just use those brakes, use the grip in your tires, stay upright. Sunshine to be riding through. It was nice in the shade. It was great. It felt like a nice rolling course, but every time I got out to these sections, it just felt like I was riding on Mars. I'm guessing this is when the fast 60 milers started catching up, or they're just some highly motivated 80-mile racers. But this section was where the race really kind of heated up and started to get a little bit spicy with people passing and coming around and flying through. So it helped to pay attention here. Major congestion of the race. You can see it's hard to stay far to the right, and this is oncoming traffic, but people were trying to move through and make their time, so things definitely got a little scary and racy through here. There were a few seconds where I thought there might be a crash, and thankfully there weren't. It seemed like everybody I saw stayed upright and was doing well, and totally understandable to everybody racing and coming through. It's just challenging when the road is only so wide and you're trying to get oncoming traffic. A nice turn through here. Definitely be careful on these turns. A lot of loose gravel. Ooh, you can see him passing on the right there. People just trying to stay upright, and then you'll see up here just shortly after there's a nice mud puddle. And so it's hard to know where to go, and you really kind of have to be paying attention. But that's pretty typical for any kind of gravel race. a nice shady stretch through here. I have a feeling if there was more of this during the entire day, I think it might have come out differently. Instead, there was quite a bit of this. So this was a pretty brutal stretch. This is where it's coming out, and this climb isn't especially difficult. It's not especially steep, but it's very exposed, for me at least. In this heat, it just felt like there was no wind, and the air was hot, and as you breathed, it was hot, and the bushes on everything on either side are grown up around you, and so it just felt stifling. After that brief stint in the sun, you'll turn back into the woods and you're just about done with that lap. Everyone's doing the same distance per lap, and so it's just under 20 miles. And there's a short climb here, just like most things on this course, not especially brutal, and it's actually nice to not be in the sun anymore, but it is there. Obviously the third lap or fourth lap of this would be harder. So looking at the race as a whole, the course is fantastic. It's nice and rolling with a few punchy hills. I honestly think that the 80 might just be too much. I want to say out of the 33 racers that signed up for the 80 miler, I think 11 finished. And I had no intentions at the end of my third lap of keeping on. I really had that feeling that as my brain started to get foggy and I knew that I just couldn't replace my electrolytes enough, that had to be it for me. And so it really wasn't the course or conditioning that did it so much as the conditions. As soon as it gets toward 85, 90, and you're looking at heat indexes in the hundreds, it's time to choose safety first. At least it was for me. But overall, I enjoyed the race. I would love it if they did it in the fall. If they moved to September or October, that would be fantastic. It's just that the third week of July in Virginia just may not be in an ideal time. And this might be the coolest summer for the rest of our lives. So overall, I really enjoyed the race. The course is nice, the weather was not. And the volunteers and the organizers are especially great. And so hopefully that this race will continue on, and maybe just at a better time of year.